So declare the meeting open, and at the outset, as this is my first day, I'd like to put in record, well, from as an outsider's point of view, my appreciation for the work that my colleague and the former chairperson Jimmy Spratt done and the stewardship over this committee for this last couple of years. And I'm sure maybe other members would wish to say something themselves, but I would like to put my appreciation. I know that Jimmy was a faithful member of this committee and spoke frequently in the chamber and on behalf of this committee. So, Ross.
Can I say that I find Jimmy Spratt to be a gentleman from day one. Otherwise, we may have had political differences and maybe differences of opinion in relation to the ministry. I have to say that Jimmy was always approachable, always affable, and always a very, very good chair of this committee. So I wish you well in your new appointment, and I wish Jimmy well for the future, who again, despite periods of ill health, came here and was always the same, treated everybody with respect. So we will listen, and I certainly would like my best wishes recorded to him.
Thank you, Ross. David Minari.
Thank you. May I welcome you, Trevor, and wish you all the best. I think you'll find this committee an excellent committee. I wonder, would you accept a proposal, if the committee were in agreement, that we would formally notify Jimmy of our feelings and best wishes and thanks for the manner in which he led this committee in previous times? I'd make that a proposal if it was in order.
Well, I mean, I think it's in order if the members content if they indicate.
I would happily second that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, I think the clerk will take note of that. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, I want to echo the words that have been said today. We had a good working relationship with Jimmy. He was an excellent chair, and we wish him well, and I also wish yourself well in the role chairperson.
Okay, thank you. So Jimmy said, I mean, I think if I take Ross's comments there in terms of Jimmy being very approachable. I mean, most of you know I'm a very quiet sort of individual, but I'm approachable as well. So,
Chairperson,
sorry,
so this thing's recorded as totally unanimous. We certainly, Joe and myself, would also wish to be included. And certainly, from your own point of view, we'll give you progress reports as we go along on how you're doing.
No doubt, John, you and I will keep each other up to date on that one. I'm sure this is. Sorry, Brenda.
Thank you, Chair, and to make it fully inclusive, DUP colleagues welcome you to DRD, and just a big thank you to Jimmy for everything he did in this committee and his support, especially for me as a new member when I first came in as well. But you're very, very welcome, and we really look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Just to wish you all the best in your new role. Looks like you and I are joined at the hip all day on Wednesday, so that'll be good fun between the two of us to get all the work done. And just to praise the previous chair, who he was a gentleman, and I believe he was very fair, sometimes a bit outspoken, but you know, he made his point, and he'll be sadly missed. So thank you.
Thank you, and I trust that Paul will pass on the regards in terms of the proposal that David has made, and it's nice that members did hold Jimmy in that view in terms of his chairmanship of this committee. I should at the outset have actually reminded members that we are now in live session and all electronic devices should be turned off, and that applies also to the members actually sitting in the public gallery. Can I also remind members to declare any interests where appropriate, and as this is our third meeting of the Committee of Regional Development and my first, the committee today will receive two departmental briefings today. The first briefing is on October monitoring rounds, and we'll receive a presentation of the department's draft bicycle strategy. Is there any apologies?
Declan McAleer.
Sure.
Declan McAleer, and Mr McCarthy has indicated that he'll be late.
Okay. In terms of Chairman's business, I think we're all aware in terms of there was an accident earlier this week with Ulsterbus near Oma, and was actually on Monday the 22nd. The fact that there's no serious casualties, I'm sure members will wish in joining me, those children who were involved and others, a speedy and a complete recovery from this horrific ordeal for them. I would also like to thank emergency services for their rapid response. And I know there is a live investigation in terms of looking into the findings of what actually happened here, and I think given that school transport, more than anything else, I think it would be important that whatever those findings are, that I think it would be appropriate that this department would liaise with this committee as well, in case there is maybe things that we could learn to prevent something like this in the future. That's only presuming that there has been some form of error, but we'll wait to the conclusion of the report by the police and all our authorities in relation to that. Joe indicated first.
Yeah, Chairman, first of all, I want to wish you good luck with the chair and echo the sentiments about Jimmy as well. Yes, I think the road accident thankfully resulted in nobody being badly injured, but obviously safety of school buses and the safety of children going on school buses is a priority. I think it's fair to say all of us in West Rowan were hesitant about saying anything about it because obviously there may be legal implications, but thankfully nobody's injured badly. Thanks.
And Ross?
Chair, again, I would like to echo the comments that were made. My nephew and niece were actually in the bus behind, and I had another niece travelling in her private car behind that. We've paid tribute to the emergency services, and we should also pay tribute to the drivers who were in the cars behind, who got out to give a hand. And possibly it's an indication of the seatbelt policy as well. The children weren't badly injured. The buses now have this additional protection. But certainly it was a break-in accident for anyone that was involved in it and for the numbers of families, because once that happened, that news went around, mushroom basically, went everywhere. So I too would like to record my appreciation for work with the Spirit of the emergency services and the members of the public that participated in the rescue.
Yeah, I think that's important. They did leave out others who, I mean, once we first to recognise the emergency services, I take your point, Ross, that there would have been other bystanders there involved in that. And I think the appreciation should go to them with recognition in terms of the work and important part that they played in relation to that. But I hope members wouldn't mind that we would be liaised with the department in terms of whatever the findings are, in case lessons could be learned. I only presume that may be the fact. Draft minutes. So if members refer to page 6 of the meeting on the 17th of September 2014. And can I ask the members if they agree in relation to the minutes?
Agreed.
So I find all members agree, so they're happy. Is it appropriate I sign them, given they wasn't there that day? Yeah, members agreed. Members agreed, okay. In relation to correspondence, page 9 again of your pack, unless there's any objections or issues to raise, those items that's marked with suggestions of approach to note shall simply be noted. So I'll ask the clerk maybe if he could, in terms of the key items, in terms of correspondence.
Thanks, Chair. Refer member to item 1 of correspondence, which is from the Northern Ireland Assembly, All Party Group and Construction, regarding the infrastructure investment strategy. Item 5 is correspondence from the Minister regarding the off-street parking functions of District Councils Bill. Item 6 is correspondence from the Department regarding Belfast Rapid Transit public information events. Item 7 is correspondence from the Department regarding the draft bicycle strategy public consultation events. In table correspondence, there's correspondence from the Committee for Finance and Personnel regarding their meeting with the Quarry, Cupani. Just to inform members that a meeting has been set up for the Chair and the Deputy Chair to meet with Cupani on the 30th of September. Obviously, we'll not need to check your diary. Table correspondence again from the Department regarding traffic difficulties in Clady, Dungiven and Hillsborough. And finally, in tabled correspondence, there's a copy of EU Matters that has been compiled by the Assembly's EU Information Manager.
Okay, sure.
Chairman, just on the issue relating to the off-street car parking bill, the Minister is seeking confirmation from the committee that they would help in a 30-day period to have the bill presented in the Assembly. If that's not possible, accelerated passage, so can we give that undertaking?
Well, the advice that has been given to the Chair is that there are still a number of issues that require clarification to the local councils. Members are being asked to agree that the Department provide them with an update on October the 8th. It's not expected that the bill would be introduced until mid to late October. The 30 days is doable, provided that there are no significant obstacles with regards to the councils. So if members were content that we invite the department to brief on the 8th of October and that members then make their decision at that point.
So can I just ask just for clarification then, so what you're suggesting, Paul, is we approach it in terms of with the view of the 30 days, but at any stage then can we actually ask for an extension to that?
Within the 30 days, yes, we could seek the extension if required.
Okay.
The response to the Minister, if members are content, would be that in principle the committee would agree to the 30 days, but that they require further clarification in respect of outstanding issues from local councils.
Okay. David?
Thank you. Just to put it into sequence and for clarification, this morning we're going to talk about October monitoring. The idea of car parking has, in my opinion, strong financial implications. Are we going to be in a position within the budget and within October monitoring to be taking a decision on this before legislation kicks in or the legislation is brought to us? I'd be a bit concerned that this is an important issue.
I agree with the point you're making, David, but I think maybe that's where the caveat in terms of approaching it with the view of the 30 days. But as we get through that, I mean, so that's given us a month from whenever we start to actually find out whether we actually want to extend that or not. I mean, I take your point entirely.
But without labouring it, the officials, it's unfortunate we can't talk about it now. It's nobody's fault, I understand that, but unfortunately we can't talk about it now. It's not in October monitoring. This whole thing has been taken out just as if it's happened, it's happened and that's it. But yet this committee has had no ability to discuss this in the detail in which I think, because I think it's relevant to the legislation. In other words, there are parts of what I have seen as the proposals that basically, in blunt terms, we're giving away assets, and yet we're reading here. We've been in that business now. Yeah, we're reading here. We're in diffs.
There's a flip to that, of course, as well, because when we're, I think, good a lot of us were in local government at a time, and many of us actually wanted that transferred when we were in local government, thinking that it would be useful in terms of revitalising town centres. And we were making suggestions, and I know most local governments were making suggestions to DRD at that particular time about looking at charges. And I think that's where the genesis of this came, that DRD said, well, basically, if we give that to you, you can look at that and actually see what revenue you can do and what you can do to revitalise your town centre. So we need to be very careful, David, that we're looking for a cake and eating it here at the same time. Many of us have come from different backgrounds, come from a different place where we supported the transfer. I take the point in terms of the financial situation we're in today, but we have to be also cognizant that we actually, I think what was it saying is we have to be careful what we wish for. Many of us actually wished for this for some time, so as we had more control over car parking to revitalise our town centres. So,
I understand.
But maybe let Paul speak and then.
One of the key issues that the councils responded to as part of the consultation was that there was an element of challenge to the idea that the transfer would be cost neutral. So again, it was one of the reasons why I was suggesting to the Chair that we delay a formal decision in respect of this to allow members the opportunity to challenge the department at the meeting of the 8th of October.
I'm not challenging any of that at all, and I take on board what the council's wished for. Right? This isn't a council. This is a committee of the Assembly, and we're talking about the scrutinisation of some form of legislation when it comes. I'm just a bit worried about the timing of it, in order that we do not agree or disagree on October monitoring, and then find ourselves gifting stuff that we may reconsider or we may not. And I understand what the clerk's saying about cost neutral. I don't believe a word of it. The figures that I read aren't cost neutral, and that's why it's an important issue. Just important the timing of.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the point you're making, but I think from the outset we had said that we're giving ourselves a period of time. If we can't do it in that period of time, In terms of the scrutiny of this, we can actually ask for that extension. I think it's within our gift that we don't actually let it complete too early if we're not content in terms of direction it's taken. And I mean, I think there will be an appropriate time to actually, in terms of financial management of that, and actually asking those questions that you're referring to, David. I think there's still a time and opportunity for that. Are members content then to note the items that have been marked accordingly? Agreed. Are members content to forward the correspondence from the all-party group on construction to the department regarding the update on the ISNI portal?
Agreed.
Agreed. Are members content to confirm with the committee office they wish to attend the STEM Syntonus drop-in event on Wednesday, the 1st of October? Agreed. Yeah. And are members content to agree in principle to the Minister's request and also to invite officials to brief the committee on the 8th of October in relation to the outcome of the consultation exercise? Agreed. So agenda item 5, refer members to page 58 of their pack. So the members now will be briefed by the officials. Officials, I'm sure, are more familiar to the members than I are to myself. We have Deborah McNeely from the Director of Finance of DRD and Stuart Barnes, Head of Financial Planning and Management Branch of DRD. Can I make you welcome and say this is my first opportunity to meet you, and I'm sure, as I've said, the members are familiar with you. Again, can I remind members to turn off their phones as they do interfere with electronic devices also as they interfere with the recording equipment. And I'm not sure who's leading off here, so Deborah, okay.
Yes. Thank you very much, Chair. If you're content, I'll just make a few opening comments and then take questions, because I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions given the evolving position around the budget that we all know about. In terms of the paper that you have in front of you, it does two things. It provides a bit of a budget update in relation following the outcome of June monitoring, and it also sets our October monitoring position in context. Now, obviously, this was written last week, whenever certain percentage reductions and so on were being talked about. You'll no doubt be familiar with the press this morning where they're talking about higher numbers. So as I say, the whole budget position for this year and obviously for next year is evolving, and certainly we're happy to take questions in terms of what's in this paper at this point in time. All right. So in terms of looking at the budget update aspect of this for the 2014-15 year, I think one of the first things is to put in context the over-reliance that the department has in relation to in-year funding in past years. Some of the committee members will be familiar with the bids that the department has routinely put forward in order to provide and support essential services. For example, last year we got 16 million in resource funding to assist us with concessionary fares, to fully fund concessionary fares, but also of that 9 million was necessary to support street lighting and roads maintenance. So we are heavily reliant on in-year funding. Again, in terms of structural maintenance on the roads, last year at monitoring rounds we got an additional 58 million for structural maintenance. We are again heavily reliant on in-year monitoring to provide or help provide a measure of funding to deliver these essential services. I think that's an important part of the context in terms of where we start this year in a very different financial environment, where the outlook of getting any bids met is extremely limited. In terms of entering this year with that sort of backdrop of financial constraint, the Minister had already made it clear that we needed to take measures to live within our existing baseline and not anticipate or not expect to spend at the same levels as last year. So at the start of the year, before June monitoring, there was action taken to ensure that our expectations in terms of what could be delivered on the ground matched what could realistically be funded this year, and that's where the figure of 11.9 million comes into play, where basically we were opening back spend, knowing, for example, that it was highly unlikely that we would get additional funding. Since then, at June monitoring, the department put forward significant bids and secured 5 million resource for concessionary fares. You'll have seen in the paper that we're bidding for the balance of concessionary fares funding at this monitoring round. But the substantive issue at June monitoring was obviously the reductions that were applied at that point in time, 2.1% for the department, which equated to just over 7 million. But it was also asked that departments prepare for 4.4% reduction, which for the department is 15 million. The Minister is on record as having taken steps to deal with this £15 million baseline reduction. And you'll see that I have summarised the actions that the Minister had no option other than to take. You no doubt be aware that he has had to take the very difficult decision to stop issuing new work instructions to our contractors across a range of service areas. 1 quarter, it's really 1 quarter of our work was given to external consultant or external contractors in the areas of footway and carriageway patching, grass cutting, environmental maintenance, gully emptying, road marking maintenance and renewal, and traffic signs. In addition, he's also had to stop and rein back on the repair of streetlights. Whilst funding is there to obviously address safety works and make sure that the system is safe, there is no funding available, essentially. That we had to rein back on the funding for the repair of outages where bulbs and that go out. And that is a very difficult decision, again, that the Minister has had to make. In terms of the process that was taken to determine the reductions that would be taken forward in the department, the Minister and senior management teams and various teams across the department were heavily engaged in reviewing all of the budget lines across the department and looking at our contractual commitments, looking at the funding positions in terms of our arm's length bodies. And having done all of that, and taken some of the decisions which, would be looking at admin. We've made reductions in admin to the tune of £2.5 million, and we have made other reductions, putting money back to DFP in terms of money that we had for Public Transport Authority and money that we had for the sale of income generating assets. In terms of that, the Minister had no choice, really, other than to go down the road of reducing the work to external contractors. He has also taken, you'll also be aware that TransLink is working on the basis of a 9.3 million loss this year, and that could increase depending on any further reductions that the Minister that is applied by departments, or depend on the Minister's further considerations in relation to that issue. Northern Ireland Water, you'll be aware from the paper, is already trying to manage pressures in excess of 14 million. So it is a pretty stark and very difficult position across the department in relation to the current measures that have already been on the table, in other words, the 4.4%. Looking at October monitoring itself, we are handing back capital reduced requirements, and they are significant, and the Minister and officials have certainly expressed their concerns about the level of capital reduced requirements coming back at this time on a number of projects. However, 5 million of that is related to the Department's success in getting EU funding. We're handing that 5 million back, which means it's available to the Executive to reinvest and reallocate in other areas. In terms of our bids, they're very similar to the bids that were put forward in June monitoring, and the biggest issue is the release of value from the Belfast Harbour Commissioners, which is the £20 million bid that we also put forward at June. As I mentioned before, we're putting forward a bid for £4.5 million for the balance of concessionary fares funding at this time. Again, at June, we'd also bid for a funding shortfall in Northern Ireland Water, because Northern Ireland Water isn't currently funded to the level of the PC13 agreement, although we had an undertaking that would be looked at favourably. But given the current financial circumstances, there's less funding available for reallocation. Given the significant reining in of expenditure that the Minister has had to take decisions on in relation to streetlight repairs and road maintenance, we are putting forward bids again at this time to try and see if we can get some funding in order to sort of reinstate or reinvigorate repairs in that area. You'll also see that there is a small bid for non-cash for Northern Ireland Water. Turning then very quickly to our capital bids. Again, the nature of the bids are very similar to the ones that we put forward at June monitoring. The bids have been reined back in most cases to reflect how much could actually be spent between now and the year end. And obviously you'll see the most significant bid there is for structural maintenance on the roads. And as I said, last year we got additional allocation of 58 million capital. So far this year we've got £12 million additional capital, and we're bidding for 45, being the amount that we could spend between now and the year end if there's an outcome in October, at the end of October. I'll not go down through the detail of the bids there. I'm happy to take questions, but that was just the high-level position in relation to the overall budget position to date and the October monitoring round proposals.
Okay, thank you. With regards to the cuts that was imposed following the June monitoring round, can you tell me how advanced was your knowledge that the department had no alternative but stopping issuing the new work instructions?
The department has obviously been reviewing its budget position, on an ongoing basis, and had been looking at a number of scenarios in relation to available funding, and the Minister had to make it, once the Executive had made a decision in relation to the level of cuts to be applied and the expected level of cuts to be applied in October, then that was at the point that he was able to make a decision in relation to how he would manage those cuts. So it has been looked at on an ongoing basis, and we had conducted a line-by-line review of the Department's baselines. There are some areas where you can make reductions in the long term. You cannot make staff reductions quickly. You need severance schemes and so on to do that. We have contractual commitments, for example. We have a large PPP commitment of 40 million a year. We have electricity contracts for the street lighting of 10, 11 million pounds a year. So there are areas that you just cannot reduce. So we did conduct a line-by-line review, and the Minister made his decision after the June monitoring outcome was known.
Just in terms of what you said in your remarks about the knowledge, well, I'm sort of preempting what you're saying or what you had said there, Deborah, that you, it seems that you actually had seen something coming down the track. So given, and I suppose the way I'm framing that about, I'm actually asking you about that knowledge you had prior to those cuts. What notice then did you give the contractors, given that you had a view that something was going to actually happen here?
In terms of the knowledge that the department had as to whether or not there were going to be cuts, I suppose it would be the same knowledge that every department had in relation to the ongoing environment in terms of funding. In terms of all departments knew that there were funding restrictions and there were funding pressures this year. We engaged with EFP officials and so on. So we would have known that this was going to be a particularly difficult year, just as we know that next year is going to be an even more difficult year. In terms of engaging with contractors, the contractors, they were not advised or engaged before the Minister made a decision.
And that's probably the wee bit I just want to drill down into, because actually when that happened, there was an outcry in terms of the contractors losing this work. But given your opening remarks, in terms of how you were following the pattern and actually what was happening, were the contractors an easy touch that they were left to the last minute the way they were?
No.
Or why, given, so we're talking about people's livelihoods here, we're talking about employment as well. Why was the decision so late in the day in terms of the contractors, and why were they not given prior knowledge that this may be coming down the track at them?
There was absolutely no intention, or there was absolutely no position that, in terms of them being an easy touch. They're not an easy touch. They were absolutely not an easy touch. The Minister, have taken other steps, including reducing admin expenditure in terms of the department. So they were not. This was the last case. This was a very difficult decision, and the Minister's on record having said that. The Minister would not have gone out to contractors and said, I might not be able to give you some contracts after the 1st of August. It depends on October monitoring. That wouldn't have been something that he would have wanted to have done. Until the decisions are made by the Executive, you don't know exactly what your funding is going to be. But certainly, there were a lot of other areas that were looked at, and money was brought in. The amount of money in terms of involving the contractors is £7 million, not the £15 million. As I said, there's £2.5 million coming from admin reductions, and there's the increased deficit in TransLink, among other saving measures, which I mentioned earlier, in terms of money going back to the FP.
Yeah, just come back to what you said, in your previous answer, you actually said there was a number of options, and that's where I'm actually indicating the contractors looked as if they were the easy touch. No, maybe you could tell us what the other options were.
In terms of the build-up to get to a figure of 15 million, the build-up to get to the target of 15 million was effectively how much reductions can be applied in admin. So there was 2.5 million has come off admin, which is nearly 3.1%. There was then, in terms of money, we had £1 million sitting in our baseline for the Public Transport Authority. Normally that money would get transferred to TransLink to fund the public service obligation if there are shortfalls in there. that money is not getting transferred to TransLink. So if there is a shortfall in the PSO, that money will result in increased loss in TransLink. So there were, in terms of finding the savings, it was take the savings first that would have the least impact on frontline services. Only when those savings were exhausted did the Minister move to look at the external contractors. Only when the other savings were exhausted.
Would it be appropriate, and maybe you're not in the position to answer this today, but would it be appropriate actually to get the committee a paper in relation to what other options there may have been open to the department, as opposed to going, as many as have seen, the easy touch in terms of the contractors?
If I reiterate, the contractors was not an easy touch. The department took all the money that it could out of all the other areas that it could before it got to the contractors. In other words, it took out 7 million from other areas, which would have little impact, if a direct impact on frontline services, and then it was left with no other choice but the contractors. I can assure the committee that the Minister would not have made a decision to in any way regard the stopping of work orders to external contractors as an easy touch. I can absolutely assure you of that.
Well, before I open it to the Deputy Chair, I'll maybe ask once more, Deborah, if you could forward us what other options were open to the Department prior to making the decision in terms of the contractors. If you could, I mean, I'm not asking you to answer that today, but if you could forward that to the committee as soon as possible. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up from that, Deborah, we have met some of the contractors and the people who do the main white line maintenance and that. They have no doubt that they are the easy touch here, and it's small money in comparison to the overall budget. And I can't escape the fact or the thought that this was the easier option. Now, there are also a major safety issue here, and you have outlined in some of your documentation about safety on roads, and markings, gullies, lights are part of that. So therefore you're taking safety at a minimum here when you're going down this road to cut this money. Would you not agree?
Again, in terms of the budget commitments the department has, a lot of money is tied up in contracts and is not available. And in terms of, in the short term, you cannot change a contract in the short term, and therefore we do have contractual commitments. So all of the contractual commitments are looked at. The admin budgets have been significantly reduced, and absolutely provide assurance that there is no easy touch in relation to having stopped the work to contractors. And you've mentioned there indeed the safety-related aspects of this. The Minister was, had to take cognizance of the safety-related aspects. So in terms of his decisions, and you mentioned options, he could have made a choice to reduce, stop the health and safety inspections on the street lighting. He can't do that. He can't stop health and safety, because of the safety aspects. If the bulb goes out, then, and it's not a health and safety issue, and you don't have the money to repair the bulb, that's different to not leaving unsafe structures out there. Again, in terms of health and safety, he has at this stage continued to safeguard winter service, which would have been another option open to him. And the other area, in terms of trying to maintain some level of service and maintain some level of repair work on the network, because we cannot quickly turn off a tap on staff resourcing, then he has maintained some resilience internally to enable internal staff squads to go out and maintain do some pothole repairs, but they cannot cover the whole province in the same way as obviously we would have done when we had external contractors to call on as well. Now, some of the savings measures that we would have taken this year were taken in the knowledge that you have to do things quickly and you have to make decisions quickly, and some of the measures that we've taken this year aren't sustainable in future years, because the streetlights in future years, they're not going to fix themselves, and only more of them going out. So the potholes are only going to get worse. So in terms of managing the current year's problem, in terms of budgets, and taking measures which can be taken this year, that was sort of part of the thinking as well. But certainly there was absolutely no easy touch in relation to contractors.
Just another question, Chair. Thanks. Describe in detail the risk assessment process you undertook in prioritising and drawing together your proposed bids.
In terms of the risks, we set out the implications clearly for the Minister whenever we put a range of proposals to him. And based on that, including, as I said, the safety aspects, the Minister was forced with an untenable or a very difficult decision, in terms of making choices. And, one of the choices was, does he protect the health and safety inspection works and health and safety repairs on street lighting, versus fixing the bulbs? Does he protect winter service versus fixing all the potholes, or can he only fix some of the potholes? So those were the sorts of risks, and we did obviously set out the risks that there could be safety issues, there could be increase in public liability claims. All those risks were set out.
You make an interesting, if you supplement that, you make an interesting point, Deborah, in terms of street lighting. I think the Minister's announcement gives a different impression in terms of safety, because, and I'm sure different officers have been inundated with calls now, different streets with 3 and 4 lights out. In terms of those reports, they've been told that because of the cuts. So on one hand, you're saying you didn't look at that aspect, but on the other hand, the reality is on the ground, in different areas, people are of the opinion that their streetlights are not going to be fixed. So you can't come today, Deborah, and say, we looked at that in terms of safety and we're not touching that, and at the same time, that's actually the reality. That's what's happening today out in our constituencies.
In terms of the safety aspect, I suppose there's two aspects to it. There's the safety aspect in terms of, the columns are safe, in terms of not electrocuting, anybody, in terms of the risk to the public from that perspective. Obviously, there's public safety issues if a lot of street lights are out, and people are out in maybe darkened areas and so on, and that's a slightly different issue. The key area that has been protected are the health and safety aspects in terms of making sure that the infrastructure itself is safe to the public. In terms of the street lighting, I think the Minister has said that they would give priority to groups of lights, to safety issues, which will be that this infrastructure is safe, and also if there are large groups of lights, those are the 2 priority areas. But there's something like 5,300 out at the minute in terms of street lights, which is quite an increase on what we would normally expect.
I have to say the guidance is pretty vague. I mean, we have an elderly population out there. We're coming into the darker periods for the winter. People who are living in fear, they're listening to headlines in terms of cuts. They're listening to where street lights aren't going to be fixed. They're looking outside their properties, already living in fear, and this is the worst time for our elderly population. And the knowledge that their street lights may not be fixed. And I think the impression that's been given out from that has been, I don't know what the best word to describe it, but I think it's deplorable in terms of how the headline and how the Minister grabbed the headline in terms of how he was making cuts. Whereas we have this ageing population sitting there, living in fear, coming into the winter months, and I think it's something that should have been looked at. Ross?
Thank you for that. A couple of things I'd like clarification on. Several comments have been made in relation to the contracts and contractors. I assume these people had not been given any contracts. There was an idea that should certain work become available, contracts would be awarded, but no contracts had been awarded at that time. No contracts were withdrawn.
The contracts are awarded and they'll cover a year, several years, or cover a certain period of time. And then against those contracts, if it was a pothole contract or whatever, a work schedule would then go out. But in terms of the work schedules that had already issued to the contractors, they were honoured. Yeah. They were honoured. So in terms of what has happened is that the work, new work is going out, but the contracts haven't been withdrawn, and therefore, if we do get extra funding as part of October monitoring round, then those contractors, we could maybe start, if we're funded, issuing orders again. So you're quite right that no contracts have been withdrawn.
You may be aware that we had a little training session this morning, and we were showing one of these bid documents. And the one that we were actually showing was from DRD for the 12-13 monitoring period. And this was actually in relation to street lighting. There were a couple of errors in it that were very school children type errors, but there wasn't even the correct adding up. Who submits this form? Who completes this form initially? And what's the process of this form going from A to Z?
It would be initially completed by the business area, who is responsible for the expenditure on the ground. It will then come through to the central team within Finance Division before the forms are then passed on to the FP. Once the Minister, he does not see those forms, he gets a submission setting out what the bids are and what the issues are and what the risks are, in and around the position.
Well, where does this form stop?
The form stops.
Where's it stop? It's going to your desk.
It goes to us. So it does.
I mean, clearly this one here, I'll use as an example, is wrong. It's 5.5 million, that's going to show 5. But the point in this that caught my eye immediately, this would undoubtedly have an adverse impact on the defence of public liability claims. If, because we have cuts, we have increased public liability claims, is that claim paid for by the department or is it DFP? Because we obviously, for every action there's an equal but opposite reaction. If you have a £5,000 contract that you haven't awarded, somebody drives their car into a pothole and the car is wrecked, and perhaps a £20,000 claim, or if you drive a bigger car, a more expensive car, it might cost a bit more.
You're absolutely right, and that was one of the clear risks. But you know, there's an element between a rock and a hard place here, and having to make very difficult choices, and being limited in terms of where you can make those choices. So that was one of the risks, that if we have to make reductions, we have had to make reductions in relation to our external contractors, both on the maintenance of the road and on the maintenance of, or the repairs of the street lights, that there was a risk that public liability claims will increase. Yes, those costs will come out of the budget, in relation to the department's funding and be a charge against our funding, and that is a risk. And
Could I
recognise
ask
that.
2 final points on that, and then I'll leave
Roll
this.
them into one, just.
I'm
just
going
for the other ones,
to. I'm on a roll now. Firstly, could we have information on how much was actually paid out in public liability claims? And secondly, if I, as someone who had an accident, sought under freedom of information this form, and this is clearly stated, of an adverse impact on public liability, I think I would have you where you wouldn't want to be in a court of law.
In terms of public liability claims, they obviously they come in and they're reviewed and challenged and all the rest in terms of the process, and a significant number are rebutted. And yes, we have costs, and those are available. In terms of the risk, in terms of how public liability claims are assessed, well, it's tested in the courts in relation to the standards of service that are provided. And I don't imagine that not having enough funding is going to be a good defence. But those are all risks, and the department's between a rock and a hard place in terms of its funding. And very difficult choices are necessary.
Well, Chair, if we could have figures just to follow this through. Thank you,
That'd be
Chair.
useful. Just in response to, before I called you, in response to something you had said to Ross asked you a question in terms of contractors. Maybe it'd be useful, maybe for the committee as well, in terms of the contractors who have lost this work, could you indicate on how many years previously they've been doing the work? Because whilst it's easy to indicate that, you know, different areas you looked at, contractors have been relying on this work because year on year this work was awarded to similar contractors in particular areas doing this particular work. So whilst they may not have been awarded the work for a number of years, I presume, but I look forward maybe to getting a paper from you on that, Deborah, I presume that those contractors enjoyed it for many years. David?
Thank you, Chair. Listen, Deborah, I know you well enough and respectfully realise that you're more than a number cruncher, and you care about the impacts which you're detailing this today, but I hope that you will take back that people are really getting fed up with this reliance on a culture of blame it all on resources. It just isn't going to cut as far as I'm concerned, because there's no ideas, no lateral thinking, and I'm just flabbergasted with this. It just is. These are the cuts, hard luck. And you can't say that to people. I think the main question is going to be, how long are we going to have to live in this situation in the period of, how long are cuts going to continue? I think that's what we need to be told. Not just, I understand the sequence of monthly monitoring, but where are we going to be in 18 months? What are we going to tell the people? It's a shambles at the moment. So how much worse is it going to get? Because I want to hear people saying how much better it's going to get and where we're getting that. From reading the report, are you or somebody saying concessionary fares are keeping TransLink afloat? Is that what's in here? Because it looks like that. Is somebody saying, and somebody could elaborate, to what extent are safety measures under threat? That's vitally important. The Chairman has explored that with you. And where I'd like to take you is, can you provide a detailed list to the committee of what roads and which street lighting maintenance will be cut constituency by constituency?
Okay.
And when will that stop? happening now, but when will it stop? Chairman's made the genuine, perfect example of heading into dark nights now. It's going to be a lamentable situation for people. And just on the matter finally of contracting, are project tenders being prepared to commission work which you know and the department know cannot be financed? Is that still going on? That you're preparing tenders on the basis, naturally, that there's a need, but you're actually preparing tenders? Is that happening?
Hopefully I'll be able to pick up on those. I might forget some of the questions.
take you
but
through
you
them
can
again
take me
if you
through
want,
them maybe
yeah.
if you can. In terms of the funding position, you're quite right about the reductions in budgets on the cuts aspect. You know, and you're all too familiar with the process, the executive, in terms of the allocations. And the department, the minister, share the committee's concerns in relation to this. You know, if you'd said to us at June, and the outcome of June monitoring, we'd have said this is dreadful, this is very difficult. Given that in the likelihood that there could be even more reductions required in 14-15 as part of October monitoring, and I understand there's an executive meeting tomorrow, well, you know, what was a difficult position and has already had very difficult impact on the ground will only get increasingly difficult. The outlook for 15-16 is even worse than we're looking at the minute in terms of 14-15. Inevitably, the resources available in the department to provide services are going to be significantly restricted.
If I may
Go
just...
ahead, maybe, in terms of 15.
The Minister highlighted publicly, very, very publicly, before we read anything as a committee, particularly about street lighting. On just what you've said there, things are going to get worse. What can you say, right? What you think, what you believe, what you're looking at will be worse than what we're reading today? Are there going to be new elements introduced where the Minister will stand up in public before telling this committee, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is under threat? How far down the line are you in your own thinking through where we are going?
I believe, for example, that the Minister is... I've said earlier that the Minister has protected and is protecting the safety aspect of the network in terms of the physical safety, in terms of street lighting and the inspection and testing. He is also protecting winter service. He is also providing a level of service in relation to potholes. As I understand it, there's 4 categories of potholes, and priority has been given to categories 1 and 2 potholes. In the past, you might have gone down below that level. So he has protected a measure of that. He has increased, there is a deficit that is already planned in NISCO and may well increase if we have to reduce funding there. And Northern Ireland Water is managing pressures of 14 million by trying to leverage in income because there's been increased demand, and also by trying to reduce costs. So a significant challenge already exists there. In terms of the options available to the Minister, we would have to look at all of these issues again and see if there is anything out there that he can, how much further he can take this. But you know, none of these decisions are easy, and you'll fully appreciate that. And that the safety aspects of this, you know, may well be a situation where the Minister may have to say, I can't make any more savings.
So what about the concessionary fares now? Is that what's keeping TransLink, this company with millions of pounds in the bank, etc.? What is the concessionary fares keeping TransLink afloat? And is your Minister prepared to take those concessionary fares out of his budget?
Concessionary fares, as you'll know, is a subsidy to the traveller, but yes, it forms a significant proportion of TransLink's income. If the company is already, assuming it gets the concessionary fares funded, the full amount of funded this year, which will be 9.5 million based on 5 earlier and 4.5 now, assuming it gets that, it still has a loss of 9.3 million, is the particular position at the minute. Given the level of reductions required and possibly increased reductions required, the Minister will have to look at the funding position for NISCO and see if it, if there's any way to access the reserves in NISCO. So that is a live issue that the Minister is looking at. By requiring the company to operate or plan on the basis of a 9.3 million loss this year, that's already affecting a 9.3 million reduction in their reserves. If that loss increases this year because there are further savings to be had, or if the funding bid is not met, That loss will increase, the reserves will reduce.
And you know the company are required to operate break-even. I mean, we already subsidise them. So I can ask you again, are you actually saying that the removal of concessionary fares would put TransLink in the red?
But increase the loss.
Okay.
I think that's a major issue for us.
Chair. And I mean, I'm reading, sorry, but in terms of what you're saying, Deborah, and following from David's point, so you're saying the concessionary is going to cost approximately £9 million a year. Why, sorry, 9 million did you say concessionary?
This year, there's 31, at the start of the year, the department had £31 million available to support the concessionary fares scheme. We got an additional £5 million at June monitoring, and at this monitoring round, we're seeking an additional 4.5.
Yeah, but I think the point David's making in terms of breaking point for TransLink, why then is TransLink sitting with 56 million on a cash balance?
TransLink will not be sitting with anywhere near that amount by the time we get to the end of the year, because
But I think the
even
point
if we
David
get-
was making was that it's
Because
supposed
all
to be...
new buses and new trains and new machinery and everything.
Yeah,
Come
we're,
on,
we're
you
talking
trying
about a
to
company that's supposed to be cost neutral. I think the point David made.
Yeah.
Currently, if they're sitting with a cash balance of 56 million, I would even think it would be difficult for a minister, in terms of DFP, to be giving a company like TransLink additional money in terms of money around, given they're holding that length of cash balance currently, given the pressures that other departments are under.
As I said, the company will not have anywhere near that level of cash reserves or reserves of any, net reserves by the time we get to the end of this financial year. It is already, assuming concessionary fares are fully funded this year, it's already looking at a loss of £9 million. If further cuts are applied as part of the October monitoring round, the Minister will have to look further at NISCO's financial planning position, as he will across the department in terms of the services provided, and may well have to increase the loss in NISCO, which will again reduce the reserves. So the reserves will not be anywhere near that amount by the time we get to the end of the year.
Kieran, you indicated, was it a supplementary? It's just John's next.
On the concessionary fare, just to remind Deborah that on the floor of the Assembly, the Minister did say under his watch the concessionary fares would remain. So if there's any alteration to that, well, we'll be looking for a new Minister.
There is absolutely no alteration to that. The Minister has made it absolutely, you're quite right, very clear that he is committed to the concessionary fare scheme, and the Executive need to fully fund their commitment to the concessionary fare scheme, and indeed, that remains his position.
I don't think that's always been
How
necessary.
big a help would it be if Kieran given his bus pass? Do you think it might-
Sorry, David. John's next here. John.
Chairperson, Deirdre, it must be difficult.
Right, members.
Sorry, it must be difficult being the messenger. I appreciate that.
Yes.
But wouldn't it have been good if we had had this conversation before the Minister made his public statement and frightened the life out of half of the population?
Absolutely.
Well, clearly the timing was during the recess, etc., etc. In terms of the budget, was the June monitoring was not agreed to the end of July. The Minister had to act very quickly in response to that because, for example, quite a lot of money in orders goes out every week, and the longer he waited to make a decision, the bigger the cuts would have been, and he would have had to have looked at other areas, like some of the areas that I mentioned earlier, like where he has tried to protect, because money goes out every week.
Well, I'm not sure if we're allowed to use trade names on here or not, but in my memory, this is the worst Horlicks ever. It really is, and there has to be a better way of doing things than this. Chairman, my mind was wandering a bit while I waited to get my turn in the slot here. And before I came in here this morning, I was speaking to my wife who's in Malawi, and I was telling her briefly what we're doing this morning. And she said, well, at least in that African country where there are roads, fill the potholes, and where they have street lights and powers available, they work. Are we facing to be worse than the 5th poorest country in the world in terms of basic provision like roads and street lights and road markings?
The financial position across the Northern Ireland bloc is extremely difficult, as we know, and there are very difficult decisions ahead of the Executive in terms of the funding allocations made to departments. And departments can only work with the funding allocations that are made available to them. So, we welcome the committee's concerns in relation to these very difficult measures and all the rest. But, and, you know, if that helps us in any way achieve some additional funding, you know, that's brilliant. That will mean that we can rein back on these measures. But as I said, you know, it's a rock and a hard place. If the Minister had not taken these decisions, the Department would be overshooting its budget.
Chairperson, last week, probably more than 100 people employed in road markings, quarries and so on, got notes attached to their pay slips. The work's gone by Halloween. Those are mostly people who are fending for families, trying to educate their children, pay their mortgages. Is this the best way a government department that's supposed to be exemplary in how it does things? Is this the best way to treat contractors?
If you have the funding available, no, it's not the best way to treat contractors.
Well, you did say in your opening remarks that the department's heavily dependent on monitoring rounds.
Absolutely.
Now, your department, I'm told, encourage contractors to go out and invest heavily in capital equipment to be more efficient, to do the job cheaper. Those contractors did that. They're now paying the monthly finance on all that machinery. Surely you can't just walk away from that.
If the funding was there, we would obviously be providing, and the work would go out to the contractors. And as I said earlier, you know, I can provide absolute assurance to the committee that the Minister did not take these decisions lightly, and that the decision that he took in relation to the contractors was not on the basis that they were an easy touch. I can provide absolute assurance on that.
Well, maybe just finally, Chairperson, and you know, maybe this is not just entirely for your department, it's for other departments, Department of Finance. Surely, in a modern, civilised Western country, there must be a better way of handling public finances than for a minister just to go on radio and television and scare the wits out of everybody that the basic maintenance. And I say this conscious that this week we have surpassed the fatalities for the whole of last year. Surely, I mean, is there no sense of crisis in the department about what has happened?
The Minister and the Department takes this position very seriously, and you know, you can be absolutely assured that in terms of making these decisions, they were taken very seriously. They were based on risk and you know, looking at the safety measures. But given that we do not have the funding, you know, we cannot give out orders which we cannot then pay for. We would love to be given the work out to the contractors, but given the budget baseline reductions that have been applied, we just don't have the money to pay for them.
In terms of money, Chairperson, and you, like I and Ross, are members of the Public Accounts Committee, are we going to be getting another report in the future showing that millions and millions of pounds have been paid out in compensation claims for personal injuries, for damage to vehicles, because the department didn't fill the potholes?
There's an acknowledged risk that public liability claims could go up because of not filling in all the potholes. But that is a risk that has, you know, we've had to accept that level of risk because of the level of funding that's available.
Well, finally, do you not think that somebody who takes a risk like that with public money should be packing their bags?
Absolutely not. I believe that the Minister was put in a very difficult position because of the budget reductions that have been applied by the Executive, that a robust analysis was carried out across all the services provided by the Department. The first priority was to look and see how savings could be made with the most limited impact on frontline services. Of the 15 million, £7 million of savings have been found with little or no impact on frontline services because they've come from, in the past the Department would have been able to put that 7 million indeed and transferred around the Department, and because it was all de minimis amounts, to supplement the funding that was provided in road maintenance. But aside from that, you know, the balance to get to 15 million, there was limited options available, and the Minister had to make a very difficult choice based on a knowledge of increase in public liability claims and safety issues. but it just doesn't have the money.
We'll
to
move on now.
pay
I
for
think
this.
before I call Cathal, just on that point, I mean, I think that's where some of us get the impression that these contractors were the easy touch. Which, I mean, you've just listed many examples, but I think we just highlights the fact that they were the easy touch. And following on from a point that John even made earlier, in terms of the Minister, no option but to make the announcement prior to having any consultation with the committee at all. There was an opportunity, whether recess or not, as happened before, committees can be recalled. Cathal.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, I don't want to rehash what others have said there, but in response to the public liability submitted, it's a reply to a written question that I submitted some time ago about personal injuries and vehicle damage. I think the figure that came back was absolutely substantial, so I believe this is a false economy. Now, Deborah, you talked about quite a number of the claims being rebutted. That's true, but I think somewhere in the region of 50% of them were actually successful. So, you know, there is a divergence there somewhat. I know that the word you struggled for early, Chair, when you were talking particularly in terms of street lighting, was when the announcement came through, there was incredibly emotive. You know, that went out among older people. That was the thing they latched onto, was the street lighting one immediately. But the other ones are equally as dangerous. You know, coming from a rural constituency, if the grass verges aren't cut, you don't see Paul at the junction, so you don't. And you know, I think there was roads in my constituency that actually weren't even cut this year, and others were cut once. You know, and given the year that was in it, Gully Empton, likewise, we're looking at flooding and water playing and all that, and likewise, well, road marking, you know, is an obvious one, and traffic sign maintenance, very obvious ones, like, you know. So I'm just wondering, you know, what was the divergence between the savings that could be made here and the risks that are actually included? And that's not even been on the human aspect to it. But others have covered that very good, and I think I look forward to see what, as you asked for earlier, the alternatives that were looked for. There's just one that stood out for me, and it's just maybe if you could clarify it for me, Deborah. It was the unforeseen issue on the A26. £3 million there. If you could maybe clarify that, please.
My understanding is that there was an issue raised through the procurement process, which was unforeseen in terms of this particular procurement process, in terms of, you know, custom and practice and trends, and that they had to go back and get legal advice, including QC advice, to inform the procurement process, and that's what has led to a sort of 4 to 5 week delay.
There you go.
Thanks, Chair.
Alex Easton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not having a go at you specifically, okay, but you know,
Glad to hear it.
I get on with the answer, and I've never actually been critical, but I have to say I'm very disappointed at what's happening here, and I'm disappointed, and I know it's points that have been raised by other people already about the 11.9 million maintenance contracts that are having to be cut because of what's going on at the moment. And I'm particularly concerned about streetlights, because there's one just yesterday where a lady in Woodford Grange in Bangor is upset she can't get the streetlight repaired because it's very dark to the entrance of the street where she lives, and she's concerned for her safety. And I just think that's absolutely ridiculous, and I do not understand why there is not a stockpile of streetlight bulbs to be able to replace that, because any competent business has a stockpile of things to be able to do work. So I'm asking, is there a stockpile of bulbs that can be used? That's the first question. The second question is to do with the reserves that TransLink have. And the Chair's already alluded it's 57 million. I'm not exactly sure what the figure is, but it's a lot of money anyway. And I know there's going to be a £9 million loss, you're saying, coming in. So if you take the 9 million off the 57, that is 48, isn't it, million pounds you've got left. I don't really see why the 11.9 million can't just come out of the 48 million pounds that are left to keep the street lights and the maintenance and the gullies and the roads and the signs and the grass all in cut. And that's why I'm disappointed with the Minister that he hasn't used his imagination to take it out of somewhere where TransLink don't really need that amount of reserves, in my opinion, because their fleet's pretty new and pretty modern and up to date, and it's not something that they need. So that's why I'm disappointed with the Minister for the first time, and that's where I am. Okay, thank you.
think two aspects to the question. The first was in relation to the street lighting. In relation to the street lighting, 75% of the work there was external contractors. There was a 25% internal resource. It's not spread evenly around the province. So therefore, the costs involved there are as much about the men going out and the equipment going out in terms of that. Given the wonderful way budgets and accounts work, even if you had a store of these street lightings sitting there, it costs you money to take them out of the store and use them, because it hits your budget. Well, so it's a bit, it hits your budget. I'm not clear in terms of how they manage that particular aspect of the business at the operational level, but certainly it costs you money.
Sorry, Deborah, in terms of that, can we find that out?
We can see certainly, but in terms of the internal resource, the staff resource, because the staffing would probably be the bigger proportion of the costs in terms of the work the contractors undertook, that certainly would be a significant cost, and there may well be some street lights sitting in stores for the internal resource to use.
If you get me a cherry picker and give me one of those stored lights, I'll go up and replace it myself.
Maybe need several years of training, I suspect, to not electrocute yourself. Not electrocute yourself.
Well, you're a man, so maybe.
Your second question.
Yours as well.
Sorry, your second question, just again.
Just the reserves at TransLink. I don't feel why he can't just take the 11 million out of that. And because I don't think TransLink need that amount of reserves, to be honest with you. I think a bit of imagination.
I mean, there's net current.
Are you looking at it?
He is, absolutely, and he has been. And in terms of that, they need 15 million working capital just to tick over, first of all. And then there's obviously the 9.3 million loss that's already planned to come out of the reserves. 23. Then subject to the reductions, and the Minister hasn't completely finished his considerations. He has some more aspects to look at, and the figures will be refreshed to see, have the savings been delivered as envisaged, have any assumptions around them changed. So it's likely, when the Minister finishes his deliberations, that he may well decide to further reduce the reserves. Yes.
Can I ask?
So it is a very live issue.
Just quickly, does Northern Ireland Water have those reserves as well?
No.
No, right, okay.
It's very much within the budget and regime that the department has.
Okay, thank you.
Deborah, when I came here today, I was listening to the Nolan Show. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Oh, yes.
There was a headline in terms of what we're facing, the executives facing in terms of further cuts. But it's interesting in the response you've just had to Alex, that go back to this £56 million cash balance. And we've heard all the headlines in terms of where the cuts are coming from. But if I do my maths correctly, I think you said there was 15 million to come out for something like the 56. That's their normal working capital. So that's a given. We'll accept that. Which drops us to 41. We take out the other 9 for concessionary fares, 32. So to leave them with the £32 million cash balance, where other departments are facing a squeeze, where we're talking about street lighting, where the analogy I gave you earlier in terms of reaching population and living in fear, we're talking about where Cahill and referred to the estimates for repairs to damage or claims in terms of 5 million. I actually think the whole business case in terms of where these cuts comes has been foolhardy. I think to look at £32 million, as someone has said, in terms of a relatively new fleet, and to hold that degree of a cash balance when other areas are under pressure, that's my first point. The second one is, and I think there's been reference made in terms of the reliance on monitoring rounds. From June 2011 to January 2014, your department made 72 bids. And of the 72 bids, 61% of these were accepted in terms of the additional monies you were looking for. So, again, even that says to me, in terms of the financial capability of the department, that we're actually living with the begging bowl continually and not planning appropriately for the future in terms of the department. Because it does seem strange that there's been such a reliance on monitoring rounds since 2011, right up until even today. You're saying that you have further bids. So your success rate has been 62%, but I would suggest that the monitoring rounds should have been really to capture things that were common, I suppose hidden things or things that were unforeseen. But there's a reliance on monitoring rounds within that department, and that in itself seems strange to me, but maybe you would want to give us a comment on that.
Okay. So two aspects. Your first aspect's around the NISCO position in terms of reserves. The 55 million, you're quite right, that's net current assets figure. basically. But against that already, there's net, at the end of the year, there were net liabilities. There were liabilities against that. So their net assets are actually only 25 million. Now, they need to retain £15 million worth of working capital just to keep the money flowing around the system. There's obviously the £9.3 million loss, and depending on the Minister's further considerations, that may well increase this year. Even assuming that concessionary fares is funded next year, there's a loss expected to be incurred next year as well in terms of TransLink's numbers. So, in 18 months' time, the reserves will be... I mean, that's not even including any capital investment they might make. But assuming they had another £10 million loss next year in 15-16, the money is just disappearing in terms of that. And we do have to leave them as a going concern. And that is an aspect that is being looked at the minute. And the projections are being looked at for NITHCO in terms of looking at a range of funding scenarios to exactly examine the impact on their reserves and on their status as a going concern over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. But it's a very difficult picture, and they certainly will not have anywhere near those level of reserves, and will be indeed relying on those reserves unless they will be relying on those reserves just basically they'll be gone in 18 to 24 months' time because they're working on the basis of a loss this year and a
I have
loss
to say,
next year.
sometimes I'm described as a cynic. But when I look at £56 million cash balance, when other departments are overspent, and I think there was a report done in terms of TransLink, in the past, and I think the conclusion of it was fairly damning in terms of its capability of managing its own affairs. But I would suggest that that report's got it wrong, because if they can hold £56 million today, when other departments are running, scratching their heads looking where they're going to get money from, I don't think it tells a particularly good tale. Alex, I think you wanted a supplementary there, sorry.
I think we need to get to the bottom of this TransLink thing. They've got such a modern fleet and up-to-date services, and they're still operating at this potential huge loss. I do think maybe down the line we need to find out why is this ongoing, why does this keep happening? And, when you've got such an up-to-date, efficient fleet, why does it keep going like this?
I think if the committee's happy, we could maybe look into that further. Deborah, I'll leave you the last word, yeah.
You'd asked about was the bids and our over-reliance on monitoring rounds to meet essential service delivery needs. And the sort of the propensity of bids during since the period 2011. I think that reflects the fact that the department's very much of the view that essential services were not funded as part of the budget 2011-15 settlement, and that has left us in the position that we are over-reliant on in-year monitoring to meet basic service delivery needs. The other aspect is that the department has a capacity to spend capital at short notice in terms of the maintenance of the roads, in terms of structural maintenance and laying tarmac. And there's almost an element where the department is viewed as a safety valve, whereby we can get capital out in the ground where other departments maybe can't at year end, and we do benefit from that. But we're on record as raising the issue that we are underfunded, and we're historically underfunded, and that's why we have to rely on in-year monitoring, because the budget 2011-15 settlement didn't fully fund the department's needs.
Which, I mean, in terms of our reliance, that was something that your minister signed up to as a member of the executive. But in terms of the capital spend and how good you are at the capital spend, it's unfortunate in terms of DRD, the capital spend always comes in the winter months. So we're resurfacing roads, we're actually running around looking for contractors who are incapable of actually completing the work on time, and we're resurfacing roads in winter months where the period of time in terms of that surface is going to last isn't there, instead of planning that in further advance. But I think we'll have to bring that to close now, maybe. Thank you, Deborah, for coming today, and Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item 6, members, if members refer to page 75 of their packs, can I call forward the officials? Can I welcome it's Andrew Grieve and Orla Campbell?
He leaves the back at the door. The back at the door.
Yeah.
Good.
Andrew, are you leading off in terms of
Yes,
presentation? Yeah?
yes, sure.
I mean, we're running over slightly here, so maybe for about 10 minutes, and we'll then open it to the members. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I welcome another opportunity to speak to the committee about the Minister's draft bicycle strategy and to answer members' questions. I hope you have with you a summary of the slides. Yes, everyone got them? Good. I have with me Orla Campbell from the Cycling Unit. Orla has spearheaded the work on the draft bicycle strategy. In terms of the background to this, cycling has been on the government's agenda for quite some time. And we in DRD have talked about it in our major strategy documents since the department was created following devolution. And I've picked out a number of direct quotations from both the 2001 Regional Development Strategy and the 2002 Regional Transportation Strategy. Revive the healthy habits of walking and cycling, shift an emphasis away from the car towards more sustainable modes such as walking, cycling, etc. Now, all the right noises were made and have been made, but somehow, even though these documents were signed up to by the executive, we've almost all continued to use our cars to get around. If you look at the department's new approach document from a couple of years ago, it continues the theme of promoting an increased mode shift. And again, the programme for government priorities, more people using sustainable modes of transport, improving health and well-being, protecting the environment. They all highlight those things to which cycling makes a real contribution at both the individual and the societal levels. There is, at the moment, a cycling strategy in existence which dates from 2000. And this has some very admirable objectives in terms of moving in the direction of developing a cycling culture. And again, some of the quotations, direct verbatim quotations, are taken from the cycling strategy there. So there's no doubt that what we wrote in 2000 is still what we're saying in 2014. But it's probably true to say, however, that we're still behaving in 2014 just as we were behaving in 2000. So little probably needs change at the philosophical level. The change is really needed at the practical level. And that really brings us then to the Bicycle Strategy 2014, or I should say the draft Bicycle Strategy. The draft vision that's in that strategy, it seeks to focus on the practical, how we convert what we know about sustainable travelling into how we actually travel. Research in other places indicates that in excess of half of the population is interested in using the bicycle, but it has real concerns about getting out and about and doing it, and that's particularly true on the public road. So the idea of our draft vision is to try and help that huge group of people, to give them the freedom and the confidence to travel by bicycle. And part of that's to develop the idea of sharing space and to do so with respect for all other road users. Also to help people recognise that there are many wider benefits from using the bicycle than just as a better means of travel. And we would probably argue that in these days of straitened finances, we actually need simple, cost-effective solutions to deal with what are really very pressing issues. So, although it might be over 200 years old, the bicycle supports health, environmental, and brings health and environment and social benefits at both the individual and the community level. And we know that the committee obviously understands this, because your own cycling inquiry has highlighted the cross-cutting nature of the cycling issue, and you've brought a great focus on the benefits of cycling in terms of the economy, and we, as a cycling unit, look very much forward to the publication of that report, because that will be an important input in the work that we're trying to do. The strategy is then built on the three-pillar approach. First of all, we need to improve the infrastructure, ensuring that it's safe and coherent, that it's joined up and accessible with good facilities such as cycle parking. We need to support cycling in a number of practical ways, such as making cycle training available and providing good information to cyclists, just as we provide it to other road users. And we also need to promote responsible cycling and continue the work we've done on making it more accessible to all our citizens. And this three-pillar approach, as the cycling strategy, the draft strategy, points out, has four key elements. First of all, developing a comprehensive network Secondly, keeping safety as a priority. Thirdly, increasing the number of people cycling for a whole range of reasons. And then making our urban spaces across Northern Ireland more inviting for people. So the draft strategy was launched by the Minister on the 27th of August. This followed a number of targeted informal consultation events that we've had across Northern Ireland during May. We have arranged 8 consultation events throughout Northern Ireland. I might have informed the committee that there were 6, but there's actually 8. We've added another 2. The first of these consultation events is this evening in Cookstown, and then they take place over the next 6 weeks or so: Londonderry, Enniskillen, Antrim, Newry, Ballymolly, Portadown, Belfast. Hopefully there'll be one near you, as they say. We've also arranged the Northern Ireland Changing Gear Cycling Seminar on the 16th of October. And this is a one-day event. It features various international speakers, and the objective is really to harness Northern Ireland's interest in cycling and explore the possibilities to transform Northern Ireland into a modern, vibrant, healthy cycling society. It'll focus on some of the things that are really highlighted in the draft bicycle strategy. We have about 30 people have registered for the seminar so far. I understand that invitations have been sent to the committee. The public consultation then on the draft strategy will end on the 21st of November. So far we've received, I think, about 15 responses, but it's early days. There's a couple of months yet in which people and organisations can respond. We've also scheduled another briefing for the committee. I think it's on the 10th of December. And we hope to provide a preliminary indication of what the consultation responses have turned up, although the actual consultation report, it's unlikely to be ready before the end of the year. And then finally, just in terms of what next after the consultation. Following this exercise, we'll use the material gathered to improve the draft bicycle strategy, and I've absolutely no doubt that we'll receive contributions that will give different angles that will help to improve the strategy. It's by no means a finished document. On account of the cross-cutting nature of the issues raised in the bicycle strategy and the need for departments to work together, I would actually like to see the executive endorsing the strategy. Then we'll develop a delivery plan, and what I have in mind is to focus on around 10 or a dozen significant projects that will make a substantial and a sustainable improvement to cycling in Northern Ireland. And part of this is to deliver what we have called bicycle networks. We've called them master plans in the past. That's maybe a little bit grand, but what we have in mind is to do them for Belfast and then the other urban areas throughout Northern Ireland. And we will, of course, use the existing transport plans and we'll take those into account when developing these networks. And we're also keen to explore what can be done in rural areas, and in particular to develop greenways across Northern Ireland. And we want to tie into the work that's been done by Sustrans on the National Cycle Network and also on the Eurovelo routes. We're also working with Sustrans on developing a bicycle account for Belfast. And now this is based on the Copenhagen model, and the project that Sustrans are spearheading involves 7 cities across the UK, of which Belfast is one. And of course it's important, and in light of the briefing sessions you've already had, maybe one is hesitant to raise the subject, but alongside the projects that we're developing, there is the need to secure funding that's devoted to cycling. They are straitened financial times, but it would be our view that we're in the position where we can't afford not to invest in our cycling infrastructure. So that's really maybe a very quick whistle-stop tour through what we're about, and very happy to take members' questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew. Maybe I should apologise now, except because I'm new to your whole strategy. There's a few things do interest me about this, and I suppose cycling in general. I mean, given DRD's interest in cycling, one of the things that's a bugbear of mine, I have to say, and I'll get this one out first to ask any questions, that there's an encouragement in terms of cycle to work schemes. But there's no joined-up approach in terms of each government department. This building alone, in terms of the Cycle to Work scheme, is only open in March. So if you want to join a Cycle to Work scheme, which we should be encouraging people to join, you can only apply in March. So we have the Big White Hill, the building in the Big White Hill, and we're supposed to have government here. DRD is supposed to be the champion in terms of cycling, but Stormont only open it to their staff in March. And I'm not sure what other departments do, but
Is this a time bounded? Can you only apply for a couple of months?
you can only apply the scheme in the Assembly in March. Other departments you can apply at any time.
In DRD, you can apply it.
Yeah, but I think it's, I mean, just in terms of, it's a general perception in terms of, so we're looking at strategies here, Andrew.
Yeah, do you want me to come back, Mr. Chairman, just on that particular point?
But the point I'm making is we're looking at strategies.
Yeah.
We talk about joined up government.
Yeah.
The building and centre of government actually only open up to their staff in March for that financial year. Other departments open at different times. The police only open up twice per year. So, I mean, we're coming up with strategies and trying to encourage people to get on their bicycles, but the two things actually conflict with each other. I'll ask you one other question maybe in terms of that. In terms of your strategy as well, Andrew, is this a strategy or is it a statement, or is it not just a statement of intent? Because I think even given what you said in terms of funding.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that it is a statement of intent, and we believe that is important. If you look at other places which have really made a difference, it has begun with a statement of intent and political commitment to do so. Copenhagen is a great example where 40 years ago there was a political decision that was made to go for this, and all governments of left and right in Copenhagen, Danish terms, they signed up to it. Now, we believe that it is very important that there is a political commitment to this. Now, it certainly is a statement of intent. We do think it's a bit more than that. It does set out where we want to be in 25 years and gives us an idea of the direction in which we want to go.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment because, I mean, in terms of your introduction on the document itself, it said that this strategy document outlines our vision for cycling in Northern Ireland at a high level, how we intend to achieve this vision. But the CTC issued a press statement on the strategy and stated, fine words, but targets and funding still need it. And I think, so let's set aside the funding. So you're saying, Andrew, in terms of 25 years, we know where we want to be. Well, CTC are saying there's no targets.
No, not in the strategy. And again, the whole issue as to whether we include targets in it or not is still up in the air because it is a genuine public consultation. The reason why we took a conscious decision not to put targets in at this stage is because our idea at the moment is to do a delivery plan, and in the delivery plan it'll set out those key projects and what those key projects are to deliver, and certainly there will be targets in the delivery plan. Now, the issue as to whether we bring some of those into the strategy or not, I mean, that's an open question, and it will be a question that we expect during the consultation events will be foremost.
In terms of, go back to your own document again, paragraph 5, section 5, second paragraph, we have consciously chosen not to set an arbitrary Northern Ireland-wide target for percentage of people cycling by a nominal date, as we do not think it will be useful in encouraging people to use a bicycle as a mode of transport at a local level. Does that not actually conflict with what you're actually trying to do then?
Targets don't make people cycle.
No, sorry. The target's one aspect, but do not think it would be useful encouraging people to use a bicycle as a mode of transport. To me, that's a direct conflict. In terms of trying to, well, so we're coming up with in terms of cycling and a strategy, but we're actually not encouraging people to use them. That's what that says.
Yeah, that's absolutely not the intention there. What we were trying to make the point of saying there was that by introducing a high-level Northern Ireland-wide target, that is not in itself going to get people cycling. By developing area-specific schemes, which is what Andrew was talking about for our implementation plan, and setting specific targets for those areas, i.e. when we implement this scheme, we would like to see X number of people cycling. That is what we think we should be measured against, not an arbitrary Northern Ireland-wide target.
Okay.
We're not against targets.
No, but
it's
where we apply
target
them.
is really the thing that we feel.
Yeah.
I'll call Sean first and then John.
Could I just say about the Cycle to Work scheme? It is an HMRC scheme and it is an employer-orientated scheme, and therefore the employer who runs the scheme will make different decisions as to how they actually implement the thing. So that accounts for the variability.
But that's in terms of how, one could see it as an encouragement, and I mean, it's an incentive to get people onto bicycles. So there is an incentive there in terms of the HMRC, which was, I think we should acknowledge, is a good incentive. However, it does seem strange that each department function it entirely different. I mean, if it's an incentive and we want to get people in terms of promoting healthy lifestyles and healthy living and getting them onto cycles, then each of the government departments should have bought into the scheme.
My understanding is that the NICS operates the scheme the same way, that it's open the whole year round. But NI Assembly is a different employer.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why there's a difference, because NI Assembly is taking a different view.
Sean?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. In terms of looking at it from an All-Ireland aspect, and I know down south they have targeted no school children and they have set targets there and they have achieved them fairly well, I think, in terms of the numbers are cycling school, and therefore that has a knock-on effect onto the infrastructure. And safety, I know one of the things is that parents will only let children out if they feel there's a safe environment, safe infrastructure. And will you have a budget of your own so that you can implement, we'll say, certain aspects of your cycling strategy, or will you be dependent on other departments, and that will depend on a lot of goodwill, whether they're going to implement it or not? And in relation to the rural areas, I know a lot of this can be major urban centric. What happens is of rolling this out into rural areas where I come from.
Okay, in terms of budgets, we have at the present time a budget for our Active Schools travel programme. So the Sustrans is run is 1.2 billion over 3 years. So we have the funding for that. That takes us through to 2015-16. That takes us then into the next budget period, and our expectation would be that we will bid again for the next budget period to continue the programme on and perhaps even expand it. Okay. We also have bid for the next budget period, although it's a little bit of a problem because the next budget period has been postponed for a year. We have put in bids for capital expenditure for the next budget period, and that will give us a budget that we can dictate, we can decide where it is spent on particular projects that we are sponsoring. Now, part of that will be to improve infrastructure at the schools that are participating in the Active Schools travel programme. So the training will be taking place, the encouragement, the promotion will be taking place, but any issues from an infrastructural point of view in the area of the school that need to be addressed will be addressed through that capital expenditure. Now, this year we were successful in the June monitoring round, and we obtained £1 million for infrastructure at the Active Schools programme, Active Schools, and we're working with Sustrans. Sustrans are doing a little bit of work for us in auditing those schools to identify schemes that we hope to have done by the end of the year, and those will be concentrated at the schools that are at level 2 and level 3 of the current programme. So the idea is to have a budget, but again, we've only got a monitoring bid this year. We want to have a budget devoted for the future, but that hasn't been agreed as yet.
Just one more point, Chairman. In terms of lobbying the department, I know, again, I near the border, so schemes, road schemes, include cycle lanes, regardless how long or short. But once there's a new road scheme, it has a cycle lane. It doesn't here, and therefore one good idea would be to include those in schemes. I know it's more expensive,
Yeah, and interestingly, that's an area of work that we're taking forward at the minute. Interestingly, we had a meeting yesterday afternoon on a plan for the A24 Ballinhitch bypass.
Yeah.
And what we're working with the Transport NI and the consultants is on ensuring that there's a cycle lane on that, a shared footway, cycleway on that. And they have bought into this idea of doing the work whenever another transportation intervention is underway. Just to come back to the rural issue, we have a plan set out in the draft strategy to focus first on Belfast and then roll out to other urban areas. But we also begun a little work to look at the development of greenways throughout Northern Ireland. And there's a little group that we're setting up to begin to look at that. And that's one of the ways in which we can connect our rural areas to urban centres. And what we're actually looking at is a sort of a spine going right across Northern Ireland, from which we could then make connections to the other areas. So that is another bit of work that we're taking forward.
Yeah, and just a comment, Chair, that would be welcome. And we did visit the Western Greenway down in Mayo, which is not only that, it's a huge success now with hundreds of thousands of people using it, so it has a tourist aspect to it.
And connecting into that would actually be, you know, one of the objectives
And
that we
as
have.
a slight aside, as an encouragement to attend the Northern Ireland Changing Gear seminar, we have a speaker coming from Mayo, the architect from the town, Simon Wool, who was very involved in all the work that's been done down there.
Thanks, Chair.
Before I call John, it's an interesting point that Sean makes in terms of road infrastructure and making cycle lanes. But in terms of your strategy and your plans, have you ever planned to actually make them actually use the cycle lane once we have them? Because we have loads of cycle routes along roads, but we still have the cycles on the road and the footpaths around it.
Yeah.
We also have the problem of drivers parking in cycle lanes, you know, so there are issues here about respect, and that is one of the points that I mentioned earlier and is highlighted in the strategy. We need to sort out what is for who and who uses what, and there are a lot of issues there that we are alive to.
I'm just thinking, I mean, parking's certainly not, the one I'm thinking, I mean, it's a bugbear in my own area. So we have a main road between Randallstown and Humberston. Good sized carriageway, good sized footpath that's been provided at an expense for cyclists, but we still get the cyclists from the road. So, I mean, I would love to see in terms of the development of that, where we can actually encourage the cyclists to use what's provided and get them off the road, and which would address road safety issues as well and prevent other types of hazards. But that's only a point. John, call you.
Chairperson, maybe on that subject, how do you encourage a code of conduct that's easily understood? I mean, the girl in our press office, the senior girl in our press office last week was knocked off a bicycle by a city bus. You know, and I don't think there's been any effort even to sort of ring up and say, sorry, we done that. But that's her business, not mine. The people I might describe as the Light Road Brigade, they can occupy the road and they do it extremely well. But for the ordinary person who's out on their bicycle, or Sean might say their rower, they don't stand a chance. Is there anything in the highway code as a driver? I mean, I've learned to be nice towards these people and go on to the other side of the road, but others don't do that.
Well, one of the things that we're, again, another bit of work that we're spearheading is with DOE Road Safety Division. They have done a number of publicity campaigns, one of which is the Respect campaign. You may have seen the advertisement. And that highlights the importance of respect, one road user for another. So we have begun to work along with them to develop that theme. It's one of the themes that is in the draft bicycle strategy. But getting people to change their behaviour is a long-term thing. And I think we need to develop programmes and we need to work them up and roll them out over a period of time. There's a lot of human behaviour issues that are raised in relation to cycling.
And also your comment there about driver training, as in the city bus incident. TransLink are taking forward some good work on driver training. I think it's mainly metro bus drivers at the moment. But again, we're working with TransLink to see how we can develop that, and also we're looking to see how we can develop it with other road users. So car drivers, taxi drivers. So we are aware of those issues.
There's a Travelling in Harmony,
Yeah.
programme.
That's useful, Laura. Now, finally, I can't work out the difference between a bicycle strategy and a cycling strategy.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, Orla will explain it to you.
Okay. At the outset of this process, I suppose we did start off thinking we were developing a cycling strategy. And then, having done quite a bit of research and seen what they've done elsewhere and spoken to some counterparts, particularly in mainland Europe, we discovered that perhaps one of the barriers that we had come across was that up until this point, we had planned for the activity. The activity is cycling. For other forms of transport, we plan for the mode. So why are we not planning for the mode of transport in this case, which is the bicycle? We plan for the car, we plan for the bus. Let's plan for the mode and not the activity.
Okay, thank you. Brenda, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. And it's really, I just want to drill down, I suppose, on Sean's point there on the greenways. And I read you have the intention to look at proposals to develop urban and the rural greenways.
Yeah.
Have you identified any potential greenways at present, and have these been costed, given that you will be looking for funding down the line?
Right. We have identified what I'll call a grand plan. We're in the process of scoping it out and looking at costs. What we have in mind is to develop the greenway from Belfast through Lisburn to Portadown, from Portadown to Dungannon, Pomeroy, Omagh, Strabane, Derry, which is the old GNR route, okay? Although a lot of that
Sounds expensive.
A lot of that, it does sound expensive. That would connect into the Newry Canal Greenway. That would connect into proposals to do an Ulster Canal Greenway. And at the top end, it would connect into proposals to do a greenway up to Mallinhead, Carndonna, County Donegal. Now, of that route totals about 300 kilometres in Northern Ireland, of which around about 50 kilometres is already constructed, Newry Canal, for example, and a bit out to Lisburn, and a bit coming out of Derry towards St Johnstone. That's already constructed, so there's about 250 kilometres. Now, as a rule of thumb, it depends on a whole lot of things, but as a rule of thumb, I've used a figure of £100,000 per kilometre. So that's about £25 million to do that. That doesn't include land issues, okay? In terms of construction, depends on your land. You know, it can be a bit more, it can be a bit less. But that's around about £25 million. So that would give us around about a 300-kilometre spine, okay? And that would connect some really significant urban centres and give them access to the countryside. Now, just bear in mind, if you want to compare that with other transport interventions, you know, Yorkgate interchange, you know, but no change out of an excess of £100 million, you know. So that's just, so although it sounds expensive, it's maybe not necessarily expensive. And in terms of improvement in public health, I would argue that it is money that's would be well spent.
And also there's a tourism element there as well.
The other thing about that route is that there is a Eurovelo route. Belfast, comes from Larne, Belfast, Lisburn, Portadown. At the minute, sort of heads across through Cookstown and across the Spurrins to Strabane. Now, if we follow a route roughly along the Eurovelo route, it probably opens up the opportunity to get European funding. So, you know, there are issues there. You know.
Okay, you have a big job ahead of you.
I do. A lot of things to be done, you know, and not enough time to do them.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Brenda. Just when you're developing your big plans, Andrea, Northern Ireland's got an east-west dimension, so don't forget about east of the Ban as well, because I'm just listening to what you've said. We've started off in Belfast and out round to the west, but some of us here, the east is very important as well, and I think in terms of the scenic and the beauty of Northern Ireland, I think most of it will be found in the east. David,
it's not often I hear that comment within Mr. Chairman.
Ballinhead. David. Thanks, Chair. Welcome, Orla and Andrew. I give you 10 out of 10 for your enthusiasm. but I'm not sold on it. If you ask me at present, would I rather have 2 million spent on fixing potholes and cycle paths? I think that the public, cycle users included, would want the potholes fixed. I suspect that the cyclists probably suffer more than anyone from potholes. You said earlier on we cannot afford not to invest. Fair enough. How can we afford to implement this?
Well, it's all a question of priorities, as all these things are.
Is it dreams that are priorities? Where's the priority coming from?
At the very beginning, the point that I made was cycling societies begin their journey with a political commitment to do it. If you do the mode shift, achieve the mode shift that has been achieved in Copenhagen,
Right.
what does that do for structural maintenance? It reduces the cost of structural maintenance significantly because the wear and tear on the roads considerably reduces. What does it do in terms of public health? A great difficulty that we have.
I realise all that. What you said was we can't afford not to invest, right? And I've given you fair enough. What I want to hear is, how can we afford? In the present circumstances we're in, having listened to what I listened in the previous deputation, we're broke. So how are we going to afford to implement this?
By deciding to give priority to it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. I suppose maybe following on from that, and I think maybe you didn't. I think you maybe actually haven't touched it. I suppose once you may give priority to it, I think for many of us there's greater priorities today, Andrew. I don't think we shouldn't prioritise in terms of cycling, but I think in the grand scheme of things today, actually after listening what we've just had for probably half an hour before you come forward, there's an awful lot of other priorities that will mean have a greater impact. It was interesting the analogy you used as well in terms of the was it the York Road interchange?
Yes.
In terms of the value and the number of people who will use that versus those who will use the cycling lane, I don't think we'll need to be delve deep into mathematical calculations to find out the value in terms of the York Gate interchange as opposed to the cycling, given the volumes of traffic would possibly there.
Can I say a thing? And this is not one to be cheeky or anything.
No, don't worry. I'm thick-skinned. Don't worry.
There was work done in Copenhagen, for example, University of Copenhagen, and the study that they did was looking at the societal costs of cycling and societal benefits. Okay? And they compared cycling with driving. Now, we're not Copenhagen, I understand all that. But what they demonstrated was, in their form, taking account of all societal benefits, because we might be interested in transport, but there's more than transport to the world. They worked out on a rigorous study, we can get the study for the committee, that the benefits of cycling equaled 17 euro cents per kilometre cycled. The costs to society of driving that kilometre were 9 euro cents per kilometre. So cycling was a plus, driving was a negative. Now, bear in mind that every day there are over 1 million kilometres cycled in Copenhagen. So that makes your 17 cents into 170,000 per day. It makes your 9 cents into 90,000 a day. So that demonstrates, whenever you look at the bigger picture, that there is an argument for cycling. And I don't say it in any way to be disrespectful.
I'm not a traveller. I don't know much about Copenhagen. I'm a home bird. But I look at Northern Ireland, and it's a fairly rural. Northern Ireland is a rural area. I would be difficult to convince that cycling will be anything more than a leisure activity in Northern Ireland. And I see you taking a sigh there, Orla, but I can't imagine some constituents getting on their bicycle in Belfast.
Christian Anderson comes from flipping Copenhagen as well.
And take their bicycle along the greenways to Londonderry. I don't think there'll be much benefit in terms of getting to work on that length of a trip. But I would see it more as a...
No, but they might do Strabane to Londonderry. They might be ported down to Dungannon.
Chairperson, I wouldn't want Andrew and Orla to leave here feeling that they're isolated on their own, and I put my hand up. I've sat in a square in Copenhagen a few times, adding to my coronary problems by drinking their beer and watching in total amazement at the number of people on bicycles. And I couldn't help thinking, we have the worst coronary problems in Western Europe, we have horrendous cancer problems, and anybody who can do anything to encourage a healthier lifestyle needs support. You certainly have mine.
Yeah.
Chair, just it's not a question, just to congratulate Andrew and Orla, because these people are experts at cycling, because they took me and others from this committee, from this building to the centre of Belfast, and I never thought that I would ride a bike through the centre of Belfast, but with the guidance of these two people I survived, and they deserve credit for the knowledge of getting roundabouts and where you should be and where you shouldn't be.
The people at Kirkcudbright were very regrettable about that, Kieran.
The committee may or may not thank us for that.
Okay, we better move on for a run.
As long as he sticks to the bike and doesn't take the Morris Minor route.
Thank you, Orla. Thank you,
Could I just please try and pitch the Northern Ireland Changing Gear seminar to the committee, particularly perhaps those of you that aren't fully convinced about what we're trying to do. Come along, just listen to the messages from the people we've got coming. They are inspirational, and if they don't convince you, then okay, perhaps nothing will, but just give it a go.
In closing, Orla, I will try, I will certainly attend.
Thank you very much.
All I'm saying is, in terms of the climate we're in, I think it's getting the balance, and I think
There's another conversation, Chairman, about that.
we'll have that another day, Andrew, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you once again. Thank you. Agenda item number 7, if I can refer members in terms of supporting legislation, it's on page 109. So I would just press we're just actually asking members to note that correspondence. Okay. Agenda item number 8, any other business?
No.
In terms of feedback forms for the financial scrutiny training, can remind members to hand that into the committee staff as soon as the meeting ends. And also, this may be my first occasion here today, but it's also Tara McClafferty's last occasion. So on behalf of the committee, can I wish Tara every success in terms of maternity leave and for the future. Okay, Tara, there's a card here for you as well. So.
Thanks very much.
Gavin chose the card.
Date and next time the meeting will be at 9:30 a.m. at Course Corner in 315 Ballyclare Road, Newton Abbey. It's in my constituency, so it's a good place.
Is that the pub?
That's, yes, the hotel. Hotel. It's the hotel. Yeah. And then I think we're going to, on that day, we're including a tour of the A8 roads.
Oh, very good.
Okay.
Somebody must have known that advance.
So the meeting's now officially closed.
Assembly, Committee Room 21.